Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, anyone who's watching us from America. But also to those of you that might watch us back. This is a conversation that Alara and I have been having offline, and we decided to bring it online because we want to start opening up the dark corners where people aren't really talking in the leadership circles about things that are actually still holding us back in kind of co-creating, moving forward, and creating more kind of collaborative leadership styles. Now, the topic for today is what Alara called dark sisterhood, but actually it's around why do we find that women don't always support other women, and actually why this is just as toxic as some of the other more talked about areas of putting women down. So, Alara, why don't you give us a kind of an introduction from your side as to how you see this topic and some of maybe the background as to what you're aware of?
Sure. So I think if we bring the kind of topic back to everybody has had an experience where they've had the mean girls experience, where there's almost a collective or a group, and you just know that the support isn't there. There's a lot of mask wearing. And we've all been in these situations where I'm not saying that all women in workplaces are like this, because I've had amazing bosses. And one of my first bosses in finance, I'm still friends with 20 years later. But I've seen some real pinnacle experiences through different organizations where these behaviors were going on, and I will explain more about that in a minute, but it was accepted or almost just ignored. And I feel almost that because these people were getting stuff done, the male counterparts who were potentially decision makers or would have had more power to nip it in the bud overlooked things. So it may not be aggressive, but it can be passive aggressive. It can be bullying. It can be slander. It can be gossip. And it's a kind of frequency of separation. There's scarcity there. So I'll give an example. I went into an organization actually just after I'd finished my clinical training. So thankfully, I was quite well equipped to be able to look at it from a perspective of understanding also personality disorders and group dynamics and all of these things. And I went into a team to discover in the first week that we were under investigation by HR because of the level of sickness, long-term sickness, due to stress, anxiety, and burnout. And also that it seemed to be a pattern that pretty much everybody in the team had experienced this. And I thought, this is really bizarre. I then, within the first week, someone was put on long-term sick. And I wasn't really privy to all the information at that time because the masks were there. And I had 2 levels of female management as well. So I thought, right, okay, I need to fill in what's going on here. And then slowly within probably the first month or so, I'm noticing these almost like favoritism. So the female boss treating, in particular, a couple of men in my group differently and creating a dynamic of kind of playing each other off. I knew that it couldn't be trusted. So I had to be conscious of that. I then discovered that one of my colleagues had actually only just come back from long-term sick herself, and she'd been told she was up for promotion, got to her mid-year, and the boss that I'm talking about had actually made a load of stuff up about her and said that there was performance issues or she'd made mistakes, and she hadn't. It had gone to tribunal, and this boss had actually come out and said, I made it all up. None of it was true. Still kept her job. My colleague had been put on antidepressants, was, had time off, was questioning her own sanity, yet all of this was still happening. And this particular boss was actually up for promotion still. So there was a collusion there with the boss above her and the organization that it had gone that far that it was still in place. And I kind of came into this probably only a month or so after this person had come back. So I realized that this is where we have to look at like the emotional vampires. We have to cover our back. And I realized I was going to have to be really diligent about this stuff and know that what I was playing with, this is somebody that was highly manipulative, game playing. And I knew I had to create an audit trail. So after every one-to-one, I was like documenting everything because she then tried to do the same thing with me at a mid-year. And she also tried to copy a piece of my work, a big piece of work that if I'd been in a different organization would have got me promoted. And I went to HR and I whistle blew. And it was going through that experience, but knowing really what was kind of happening in that dynamic. So I was kind of protected. I had good boundaries and I was covering myself. I knew I was in a very different situation to my colleagues who were completely, gaslit, being bullied, completely emotionally derailed. And my big question was, how is this even able to happen? And it was as though I was really being shown the true dark sisterhood in full flow, and realizing that this is not isolated, but I was in there being shown something. This person was still up for promotion, and it was only really when I went through taking it seriously through HR that she actually left just before she would have been kind of really fully investigated. And this isn't isolated. And I recognize that many people don't feel that they could go to HR and talk about it because they think that no one's going to listen to them or not be trusted.
I think what you're bringing out here is the feelings that are associated with it. You've brought out shame, you've brought out frustration, you've brought out, questioning yourself, actually, the toll it takes on your mental health.
Yeah.
But what else? What else were the kind of feelings that you had? And obviously you were better prepared, but what were the kind of feelings that you had in this situation?
I think I really was being I kept with a level of detachment because I could really see what was happening. And I think one of the things was really injustice. So I recognized that in these situations, visibility is the last things these people actually want. They don't want other people to see what they're doing because they want to keep the mask up, because that is all about outward masking. And then they generally have different behaviors in the pecking order. It's huge emotional abuse and it's highly manipulative. And I would say there's something called the dark triad. People don't need to be like, serial killers to be on the dark triad, but sociopathy is really what we were seeing here on a scale, that this person had a repeated pattern and was being supported within the organization to behave in that certain way, specifically just to women, not to men.
But what you're calling out is actually there was collaboration or collusion within your organization.
Yeah.
Now, let me just ask what you mean by a mask. So you and I talk about masks quite a lot, but can you explain to everybody else what you mean by, they had on a mask?
So you might meet this person and they will put on an absolute facade. And actually, I've got another boss that did this. She used to men be all, she'd all be laughy and friendly and all vivacious. Then she would turn around and speak to the women and be completely different, dismissive, quite cold. So masking is like changing your emotional state and the way you are treating someone.
Right.
And when it's so visible, you question, well, why have I there's two different people here. What have I done to deserve this? Knowing that actually this is a person that is used to adjusting the mask of what they're perceiving to get what they want out of a certain situation. And it serves them in particular when they are managing up or perceptions to play a certain game. Often they don't think other people can see it because they haven't got that level of inner awareness. But generally, because these people that I've come across have been extremely successful and got to higher levels of what they're doing, it's been a pattern of how they've created a level of success.
So one thing I'm just going to pull out is effectively what you've said is this inauthenticity, this out of alignment between how you're behaving in front of one group of people versus how you're behaving in front of another. And I think this is actually seen a lot in organizations. And this is partly due to obviously hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we see like the low level of this in pretty much any organization in pretty much every day of our lives. And what you're talking about is something that's actually an extreme version of this, where somebody has taken this to an extreme where they are literally behaving very differently from one group to the next and causing this toxicity and fear, scarcity within that group of people. Have I understood that right?
Yeah. And to the degree that you're willing to say or do or lie about it. So the fact that that person was willing to get to that far with that person in distress being signed off this pattern, but they are so almost convincing. And there's also generally a support network around them. So these two women also were straight into the most senior person decision maker, in the organization. So you had this thing where they were playing a certain role to this person, but then to everything else around completely different. And obviously this person, most senior guy, did not really pick up on it because that's not his personal experience.
Right.
So there's this game playing going on, but everybody else kind of knows that either if I say something about this, I'm going to be targeted. But if I, and actually it's easier just to kind of placate them, i.e. not be authentic, not be able to express that this isn't fair. So it creates this separation and segregation, because that's the thing. Then you can target one person and they're the problem, rather than there's a wider issue here. And that was obviously very kind of like the depths of it, really. But I see it in group work. I've got many different groups and communities, and the competition amongst women, especially when one person decides to really take their power, commit to, I'm going to make these changes, I'm going to set the business up, I'm going to go for my money goals, I'm going to expand, not being able to celebrate others' successes or their, experiences of stepping out of something, and that stirring something within them that triggers them. And it's quite a different energy, because I would say that the boss scenario was really about competition, separation, keeping people below you. There was lots of game playing going on, and it was about her own, she had to be seen as queen bee, the best. In the group dynamics that I see it tends to be women competing as though only one person can succeed, and it triggers their internal stuff so that they get the jealousy or the competition. And we see this more with, I guess, projection with Instagram, or competing as though there's not enough for everybody, therefore yes.
So what, we see this in everyday life, and this is actually quite, if you want, normal based on what you see around you. You can be triggered by looking, like you say, through Instagram. You can be triggered that I'm not enough, I need to do more. But it also triggers this competition. So where does this come from? What goes on here?
So I think there's a few things. So with some of the group work that I do, we go right the way back, because there's a collective trauma where women do not, like, it's called the sisterhood wound, where women just don't trust other women. And when we go right the way back into kind of collective trauma, which we know comes through epigenetics, we can literally link it back to times like in the temples in Egypt, where Christianity came in, temples were closed, women were set against each other. If you were still practicing as a doula or a healer or a nurse or something, then literally you would have been killed. So there is a deep trauma at soul level. We have things like, the witchcraft trials and everything. That is a collective trauma from the past few hundred years that affected men, women, and children. And it's this fear of, many women that were landowners, the few that would often have had somebody report them as a witch. She would then have had to have paid for her own trial. They would have taken money from her. She would have paid for everything. So it was a way to extract money. It was political. It was all about pulling somebody else down that was in power. And it's patriarchal. All of this thread is about, it's easier for women to be competing, whether it's for men, whether it's for success, whether it's for money. And it's intrinsic. It's almost like there's not enough, so we need to compete against each other. And it's come in culturally, it's come in educationally, and it's a very unconscious piece of shadow, actually, that when you go deeper into this stuff, it comes up in a lot of group work in particular, but it plays out unconsciously in workplaces, in families, in friendship groups.
So it plays out unconsciously. And I think this is the bit that we're trying to obviously bring out today, is we all know it's there. And it's how we help women get over this, women to actually step in. There's all this work around, well, we stand stronger together. You want friends who are raising your name in a room full of opportunities. So what's the flip side of this? How do we create something which is actually empowering to one another?
So I think we have to look at, there needs to be a level of emotional intelligence where you are going to be responsible or curious about how you're feeling when you are maybe outside of your comfort zone amongst people that might be perceived as the next level on from you, that's maybe triggering you. The expansion. It's about being curious about, okay, so I'm feeling inferior, maybe imposter syndrome. This is bringing up a defense mechanism that's making me want to find a way of knocking them down. And that tends to be the unconscious trigger. It doesn't feel good, but we need to go into my inner pieces where somebody maybe knocked me down. Did I have maybe a narcissistic mother that was competitive with me when I, suddenly started going into my teenage years, or these kind of patternings? Where did that experience come in? Where did this response get this wound within me? And you need to work with someone else to do that. This is about the know yourself once more, whether that's in therapy, whether it's also observing, do I find myself going into this kind of defense mechanism, because that's what it is, in groups of women, in the workplace only? Do I find it, if I've got a single friend, that I'm then competing with her if we're suddenly, going out? Like, where is this coming in for me? Because it's a scarcity pattern, but it's also going to keep you separate from really joy, from expansion, from support, from sisterhood in its like glory that is possible, because other women feel it. If you have been, all of us experienced somebody else that cannot be happy for you, what do? You don't invite them in. You don't tell them the stuff that's happening. You don't feel you could share. So if you want the depth of relationships and the connection, and you want that, it means we have to be responsible for what comes up for us, rather than projecting that out against the other people, because those circles are not going to let you in because they feel it. And, that is, whether it's you maybe competed with a sister, like it can come in so many different ways for people. Right. But it's like, at what level have you allowed that way of being? Some people have recognized that they can create extreme success from it. They can bulldoze everybody else. I'm going to have the loudest voice. I'm going to do this, that, the other. And it's paid off. So for them, it's almost like they haven't really got that many other tools in the toolkit, because this has worked. So I will find somebody's weak spot and I will, knock them down.
Do you know what? It's almost like we've gone into now self-leadership, which all leaders need to do. Mm-hmm. Because the traits you're talking about are actually what, let's be honest, has been promoted in many businesses in the last 20, 30 years. And so actually within, a lot of leadership, we've got people who are high achievers, individuals, but they're not necessarily leaders in the sense that you and I would think of them today in terms of enabling, elevating other people. And for all of us, we're on this journey as well of self-leadership, mm-hmm. and our own level of consciousness about how we're behaving, where we're being triggered, because we all know we can be better at supporting other people when we've dealt with this stuff ourselves. And like you say, everyone's got things that have happened in their past that have triggered them. And it's raising our consciousness level to be aware of when we're being triggered and what our default responses are. What's our reactive leadership style, which is where we go to, which is what you're talking about here, is like, well, the reactive leadership style is to drive competition, scarcity, fear, and actually standing in, okay, so if I'm going to take one step back here and create this as if it's not about me, it's about what I can create for, supporting other people. And, I see this in the groups. I work a lot within groups of women, and I'm helping them design a group structure, get conscious of how we create space where you can be vulnerable, where it's okay to share, and it's okay to occasionally show emotion, because funnily enough, that's what we are. But we need to create these almost permissions. And this needs to be done in business as much as it needs to be done in groups where we're networking or whatever else. So, I guess I see it as well from the other side, as there's so much opportunity when we can go into a self-leadership mode where we can let these kind of behaviors go and realize actually we're not needing to compete with each other, because we're all different, we're unique, and we can create so much more when we stand in that space. And like you say, draw the people with energy, the same energy as us, towards us.
Yeah. And I think it comes into, if you want a business to thrive and people to feel comfortable and able to bring all of themselves to the table, if I know that there's somebody that is literally waiting to pounce and there's weird energy, it makes you contract. You don't feel safe. So we're looking at, we're looking at psychological safety. We're looking at, trauma-informed workplaces. If you've had a narcissistic mother who you knew was looking for whatever gap she could to attack, you work for somebody like this, you know that you have a frequency. There's a frequency there, and it is a bit victim, a bit prey. And sadly, there are dynamics sometimes that people find themselves in workplaces where they don't feel that even if they spoke up, they could change it because it's so ingrained in an organization. And I think one of the key things here is really understanding that, we need to have a better understanding really at management level of group dynamics and where that plays out, but also different boundaries and also different cultural tolerances for the fact that we won't support these kinds of behavior, even gossip. And this is going to be a biggie, like, our words have power. But when we start to have intrinsic, gossipy, weird frequencies, it's poison. And in some of the communities I'm in, which are conscious people who are striving for positive impact in the world, they've eradicated gossip as a bad habit, because sadly, that tends to be how many people unconsciously communicate. They're not, if you were gossiping and moaning, and that's the only way you can connect with other people, you are not going to be allowed to be in those circles. You want to raise the consciousness and frequency of your businesses so that people feel expanded and supported. You have to start looking at behaviors that aren't supportive to achieving that. And it's also about recognizing that if you know somebody is coming to you to try and, I don't know, maybe bitch about somebody else, that you're the one that is responsible for setting a boundary, that is no longer responsible. And that takes skills, because not everybody is confident in setting that boundary or asserting that. But these are skills that are needed in the workplace. And unfortunately, many people have not actually been equipped with them because our parents didn't have the tools either. So again, we're back to this whole thing of this evolution of consciousness, evolution of, we have to learn these new skills often.
Right. So, being able to have candid conversations, there are some organizations that are very clear on this. You do not speak about somebody unless they are in the room, because exactly like they're trying to get really conscious that, you're more likely to say something about that person when they're not there. And yet when you have to say it to their face, you're much more considered as to how you say it. Yeah. And so, being able to give feedback and have courageous conversations. But to me, that's also part of innovation. This is where we can actually get back into creating opportunities, because this is the space below what's on the water level, where actually we can all learn, we can all grow, we can all create what is invisible to us today. Yeah. And I like I know you do, I believe a lot of what's going on, which is difficult for people to deal with, is unconscious. Mm-hmm. I think most people do not wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be really difficult today. They believe somewhere that, what they're doing is right. And it's about opening up that space to help them see with compassion, actually, you can be better if, we can all be better if, we can create more value if. And having these conversations in business, and I completely agree with you. There is, we're not given the tool set at school. We're not given it even in leadership, a lot of leadership training today. And it's about, we need to start creating new leadership experiences where we enable people to have real conversations and to call stuff out, and a way to do it that is opening rather than just shutting people down so they go back into their fear and scarcity.
And I think there's also bringing I think the key thing needs to be emotional intelligence. And we're also looking at empathy. Empathy is not necessarily a learnt skill, but I think also for us to have higher emotional intelligence in workplaces where people are dealing with people, those that score low on the empathy scale are often those that are having more of the poison traits that are happening in some of these organizations. Perhaps those people should not be facing off or having influence on other people. It's not to say that there's no place in society for them. It's perhaps they shouldn't be the one that are leading or managing teams. Because if you have low-level empathy, you're going to have very little understanding of how it is received by somebody else. You might be less speaking, kind of from the heart. and having a bit more compassion? Can you see the humanistic experience that is being created in the dynamic and how you communicate with someone? Do you know how you make others feel? Because you might think you're the bee's knees, and often these people think they're absolutely amazing. However, the aftermath of the feeling that they leave, very few people have in those positions have an awareness of it or even care. And I think we have to start being aware of this stuff, because that emotion is actually going to either bring your teams into, high frequency, we're all inspired, this person, I want to be around her, I want to listen to her, I want a leader like that because it lights me up. Or, oh my God, like, I'm trapped here. Oh my God, I need this money because, it pays the bills and I can't leave and we're in a recession. And it brings like this doom and gloom. And I've seen it in so many different organizations. People feel stuck. And it's a shame that has had to happen. And I think it's time to lift the lid. It's time for a revolution, and it is emotional intelligence, it's empathetic leadership, it's kindness, and it is recognizing we're going to change the whole narrative of people management and culture evolution, and it needs to bring energetics in as well.
Right. And, there's this typical thing that emotion, the only emotion that's really accepted in businesses today is anger or frustration. And yet, I always say, well, emotions, energy, emotion. Don't you want your people to care? If they're getting emotional, get curious because they care. There's something going on that is a gap. And like you say, this is emotional intelligence. This is compassion. And also trying to open up conversations to help other people see the power in it. Because that is where we can really create a difference. Because, as you say, people don't remember what you say, they don't remember what you did, but they remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
And we as leaders need to enable people. We need to help them feel good, because that's where they are going to be able to perform. And it's our responsibility to help them, even if it's not within our team, find them somewhere where they can perform. And that is for anybody with any skill set, like you say, and recognizing that the only way up the career ladder is not just going up into management, but giving people more opportunities. There are so many opportunities out there right now, and so many diverse roles, so many diverse companies. Actually, you can create something for people within your organizations with all of these different skill sets. But it takes a lot of listening, a lot of compassion, a lot of kind of actually wanting to create these opportunities for people. And I think that's potentially a part of what we're seeing at the minute is missing.
And I think also culturally looking at, many women that I'd experienced that were, at very, very senior levels. Yeah, they have really paved the way in the finance world to get to the levels they were. Now, looking at them as they were role models and they had to go first. But how are they changing things for those behind them? Because, they will have made decisions and had to, deal with certain challenges and certain people, and maybe sacrifice part of themselves and their own integrity to get into certain places. There has been sacrifices, but I don't believe that should be the norm, but we should use the pain, the challenges to transform the path behind us so that essentially it changes things. So I think it was Elvest. I saw that, there's many female investors that are not investing in other, women, female businesses. And it's like, well, if women are not opening doors at the most senior level to change things for those that are coming up the ranks, we need to also question what that's about as well. So it's like the visibility. If you have, like, even this is a platform, that I can speak into many different, organizations and different communities. I'm using my voice to call something out. I feel that every woman that has some level of platform, whether it's in your organization, your groups, whatever, has some level of responsibility to use her voice for positive change, to highlight challenges she's had, but bring about from her real world experience ways of changing those things. And if she's in a position of power, she's in a position of influence that has the capabilities to do that. And, we, within one generation, my mother's generation didn't have the opportunities that we've had now. We have literally shifted that in one generation. What can we do for the next generation that can radically transform this stuff? And it literally comes by turning our pain and our challenges into purpose, into being these voices, into not tolerating the bullshit around us just because it's been done like that, and just because there may still be, you know, boys' club and politics. We have to start using our influence in different ways. And that also means coming together. And that's where our power is, in my opinion. And learning from each other, and recognize that we've all been through some level of challenge to get to where we are. And let's now unite rather than separate, because we've got much more potency to stand up and have influence when we stand together, especially at the senior level. Definitely.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think at that point, rather than add to it, I'm just going to say thank you all for watching us. If you've got conversations that you're struggling to have, or that you feel need to be had within your business, please let us know. Reach out to either of us or any of the other ladies that I'm doing these live conversations with. We're all here to try and open up perspectives, because the more we talk about this, the easier it gets for everybody to bring up these conversations, to know how to do it in a way that, that can create a connection and can create change in the world. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Again, and let's talk again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.